This is Vanessa Pesec from NEOGAP, and she's going to kind of take up where Joe left off. Yep. Oh, I'm sorry. I said that. NEOGAP is the network for oil and gas accountability and protection, and it's based, I guess, in Portage County.
Yeah, well, actually, it's an organization that was formed a couple of years ago, mainly for urban drilling, when they took out, when they took away local control, so that only the state has control and there's no zoning. And so there are a lot of, like in Broadview Heights, they now have 86 wells, urban wells, you know, close as 200 feet from people's homes and so forth. And so that's how it started. And then when the Utica shale and Marcellus shale became a big issue, that's when we added the second component, and we've now become a statewide organization to try and focus on the Utica shale as well as the urban drilling. So that's where we are. I wanted to, let's see, pop this little bit, there we go. And that's kind of a good segue. You can see, yeah, kind of. My color is a little bit brighter than that, but we'll work with it. You can see where we are here in Ashtabula in the northeast corner, that it's a darker red color. And that shows that the Utica shale thickness is like 300 or 350 feet thick. And that's an indication that this is going to be a very valuable area for drilling. And so really important to take a look at that. The Marcellus shale is only about 50 feet thick in Ohio, and they're still drilling on that. So this could become really important. Currently, there are only about 10 or 15 wells that are being drilled in Ohio in shale. So it's very, very new. So the majority of what I'll be talking about tonight is regarding data from Pennsylvania, New York, and maybe even Texas and other states within the U.S. because we don't have a lot of comparable data in Ohio yet because we don't have enough wells. But nonetheless, we now have a good understanding of where it's going to be really thick. Even in the thinnest sections down in the southern Ohio, it's still 100 feet thick. So this is going to be a very important play for a long time. Job creation, I just wanted to get that up out of the way. I'll only spend a moment on it. But Penn State, which is an industry-funded study, stated that there were 67,000 jobs in 2010 in Pennsylvania, and yet the Keystone Research Center, an independent study firm, looked at employment figures in core industries and realized that it was only about 13,000 jobs. So when you're reading the newspaper, just be careful what you read. So fewer jobs. Read everything with a very critical eye. Joe went through this, that short term, there are a fair number of jobs that are created indirectly and directly from a well, but only while the well is being drilled. And it takes about a month to drill a well. And long term, only one worker for every 6 wells need to be. So this is definitely one of those boom and bust cycles sort of thing. So within drilling, who is it that benefits?
Vanessa,
Yeah.
does that figure change every time they come in and do a frac job a little bit to go up and down?
Yes, it would. Yes. So maybe when they drill the whole well, there might be a certain, let's use Joe's example of, say, 1,500 traffic that would come through. If they refrac a well, you'd still have all the water trucks and brine trucks and all of that, but you wouldn't have all the drilling equipment and all that other stuff. So you might have about half that much then. So yeah, it would decrease substantially if they have to refrac the well. So the benefit, obviously, to the landowner is that big pile of money that they're promised. And I'll say promised because you don't know whether or not it's going to come out, in the form of a signing bonus as well as royalty payments. Just some interesting data from Columbiana County, and we have Gary here representing Columbiana County. And back in 2010, before people knew too much about it, $10 an acre, all the way up to $1,800 an acre, maybe 12.5% royalty. By the time you get to this last month, $5,000 an acre and 18%. In some countries, usually on the gross, not on the net. So again, really, really amazing numbers. So those who wait make more money. So remember that. Those who wait a long time. All right. But who really benefits? Chesapeake, in their second quarter earnings stated that they had 1.25 million acres in Ohio. And they valued it at $15 to $20 billion, which means they think each acre is worth between $12,000 and $16,000. And yet, landowners were receiving those much lower numbers that you just saw. Even at $5,000, which you thought was an amazingly high number, they think that's real, still very low. So if you are going to consider leasing, realize the value of the asset that you have in your property before you would want to lease. And the other thing is, this is just a pie chart that shows that the revenue for the energy company, the drilling company, is much higher than that. Even when you look at 12, 15, 18%, they're making definitely the lion's share of the revenue. This is a map of Bradford County, Pennsylvania in July of 2008, showing a lot of the wells that were drilled in that area. They then had a boom of drilling. That's what it looks like now. And that's April, so who knows what it looks like by September. So again, that's July 2008, and in just 3 years, that's the number of wells and all of the rest that came into their environment. In Ohio, I think you can expect a similar sort of development. Right now, they're developing in Columbiana County and in Carroll County and Harrison and that area of the state. They're moving north and they're moving west as well. So they're marching up here into this area. This is from a top view. This is looking at a well pad. So each one of those little dots was one of those. Here's another well pad, and the reason that I like to show this photograph is look at the proximity of that pad to those homes. It's very, very close. And imagine with all the truck traffic, the noise, and all the smells, fumes, dust, air pollution, and all the rest, those people are really not happy. So I think that those are the benefits. And so what are the community impacts that you might experience? Oh, that's right. That we're starting to see some truck traffic. This is right outside the front of his house. It often takes quite a while. During one of the frequent construction phases, I was trapped here for almost 6 hours. A 3-mile trip to town can take up to an hour some days, and I now leave work 20 minutes early to allow getting out of my driveway. Just this week I waited for 27 trucks to pass. This was a very rural area until this nasty business arrived. You should see what is happening in the mountains and the forests.
Killer's gonna get flattened. Killer's gonna get flattened. For the full 5 minutes, but you get the gist. It's really an amazing sight to realize.
And then with that, of course, comes the road deterioration and accidents. This is a shoulder that has now was softened, and there are many photos, I don't have a picture of it, where you'll see a road that was an asphalt road absolutely turned to dirt. Absolutely dirt road because of all of the traffic that you see on there. There's another Allison truck, just like one that we saw in the photo, that's gone over the edge, maybe because of the soft shoulder. And of course this horrific accident as well. September...
Use your microphone.
Oh. Was that helpful if I do that? I'll keep it on then. There was an article on September 7th that said 7 fracking-related truck accidents in 12 days. So, I mean, if you just Google this, you can find in the last month the kinds of problems that they're experiencing in Pennsylvania that we will have here as soon as drilling starts to get underway. So when we look at the kind of accidents and pollution and groundwater contamination that they have had in Pennsylvania, they're looking forward, they're projecting 2 to 4% of the shale gas well projects will pollute local groundwater. That's an astoundingly high number. That's 2 to 4 for every 1,000, and a large number of regulatory violations. Gas migration, as Joe said, is one of the major problems, and that's the methane gas coming into your water wells. One of the high-level executives from Talisman Energy said that methane migration can occur as a result of ineffective well design and insufficient well casings. So that's the industry admitting that they can have a problem. Well, Dr. Anthony Ingrafia, who is a Cornell engineering professor and is an outspoken critic of the current process until they can fix some of the problems, said that 1/4 of all cement jobs fail immediately, and 3/4 fail eventually, because obviously cement over time will fail. So that's a large number. We have the industry saying that they fail, and we have the fracture specialist, professor from Cornell, saying that well casings are a big problem for that. Methane contamination in groundwater. The US EPA had to step in Texas because there was an aquifer that was contaminated with methane. There was well contamination in Dimock, Pennsylvania. That was a number of homes there that had that same problem. And again, the Duke University study that Joe pointed out, where methane levels were 17 times higher in water wells that were near, quote unquote, hydrofracking sites. And near meaning 3,200 feet. That's a half a mile away. And the water wells are still much more likely to be contaminated with methane. In addition to gas migration, we also have fracking accidents where actual frac fluid has spilled onto the ground and it leaks. Here, just in April, Chesapeake Energy lost control of a natural gas well and it spewed thousands of gallons of frac fluid onto the stream, and they're suspected maybe it was a cracked well casing. So is that frac fluid toxic or what? Well, the U.S. Forestry Service spread it onto a small wooded area, and 56% of the trees were dead 2 years later. This is very, very nasty stuff. And for every frac job, there is about 25,000 gallons of chemicals that are part of this frac fluid, and that's 3 tanker trucks. So a huge amount of chemicals that are, that are being released. The US EPA study did find that hydraulic fracturing was the case of a well that was contaminated in 1987. They also, in that study, looking through it, found that a lot of the cases where it may have been proven to contaminate groundwater, they were sealed. So the energy companies actually went to they settled with the people and put a gag order on the people. So there may be a lot of cases where there is actual contamination, but we won't know about them because they're not allowed to talk about them. And in Pavilion, Wyoming, the EPA found contamination in 11 water wells that were toxic chemicals that were from hydraulic fracturing, and now they're trying to prove whether or not they were actually from a specific well that contaminated it or not. It's difficult because, as Joe said, they don't have to release the actual chemicals that are part of the frac fluid. So it's difficult to prove that that certain well contaminated your well because they won't tell you what they put in there, and so it's hard to know. So it's very frustrating, difficult process. So I wanted to play another little piece here for you.
Fighting the gas company since 2007. We were approached by PG&E to sign a lease, and that was back in 2000. We didn't know anything about a gas lease, and when they came in here, their first story was, your neighbors did, why don't you? We still didn't sign, and then they came back and said, you're not going to see anybody, go ahead and sign it, and we still refused. And then they came back and said, look, if you don't sign it and they find gas, they're just going to suck it right out from underneath your feet. You're not going to get it done. They came in, they were production wells. In 2006, they shut down the production wells. Then they made them into storage wells. So with the storage wells, they're injecting and withdrawing. When they drill, they cause water problems. And with injection and withdrawal, they're causing water problems too. In January 2007, we had a horse go down, and it was like neurological. She just kicked her feet and she couldn't get up. She had to be put down. And then in April we had another cow go down that showed the same symptoms. Then we lost dogs and chickens, and we found out we had arsenic in our water and methane in our water, and we ended up getting a $11,000 water unit so us and our animals could have drinking water.
We go compressor station right outside of Woods here, no well behind us, pipelines. They went in there and tore all the trees out, double dirt up in there, packed it, and put it compressor station. That's another method.
In 2009, the compressor station blew up and blew oil all over people's property. We had it on our vehicles, our blueberries, everything that was outside got this coating of oil. When I call my regular customers and say, hey, the blueberries are in, they'll say, oh, well, don't they have methane on them? I couldn't leave here thinking that somebody else might buy it and get the headaches. Like my husband, he wants to leave the property to our 3 grandchildren, and I keep saying, why do you want to leave death to the grandchildren? Because that's what it is, it's death. You're either going to have a pipeline blow up, you're going to have a well blow up, you have contamination, you have a compressor station that likes to blow up. Who would want to live here?
Very sobering, very sobering. sobering to see a real story. You know, you hear about the facts and so forth, but this is just one of many. There are stories like this here in Ohio as well, and they're from conventional wells even, from all over the state, but this is a real tragic one. The industry admits that there are problems, and GDF is one of Europe's largest gas companies, and one of their chief executive officers, one of the divisions, said there are concerns about the environmental impact. Probably it can be improved, probably it has to be improved. And that's really quite an admission when you think about it. When the folks that are fracking right now in Ohio and in Pennsylvania and New York, when they know that there are problems and that things should be fixed and be better, and they're currently not doing anything about it, it's really startling. I think this is one of the most important reasons of all that when Joe talked about a moratorium, we need a moratorium until the regulations and best practices can catch up with the technology, because right now it's a huge problem. This is really small writing, but additionally, I just have to read Chesapeake's 8K filing, back in 2009, I'm sure they have them again. The natural gas and oil business involves a variety of operating risks, including the risk of fire, explosions, blowouts, pipe failure, abnormally pressured formations, and environmental hazards, such as oil spills, natural gas leaks, ruptures, or discharges of toxic gases. If any of these should occur, Chesapeake could suffer substantial losses due to injury or loss of life, severe damage to or destruction of property, natural resources and equipment, pollution or other environmental damage, cleanup responsibilities, regulatory investigation and penalties, and suspension of operations. Our horizontal and deep drilling activities involve greater risk of mechanical problems than vertical and shallow drilling operations. Further, they go on to say that their $350 million of comprehensive liability umbrella policy may not be enough to cover them. So we have a number of cases where the industry itself is saying things, and yet our state is really not listening. Property value decreases. Another area, I'm not going to go into it a lot, but I just wanted to tell you quickly that here in Ohio, a jury recently awarded damages to a property owner where a well was mistakenly placed about 220 feet from their home. Their property was devalued substantially, and the jury agreed, and so they were given an award, a monetary award. And also from New York, toxic targeting. Property with gas and oil well leases are generally not accepted by lenders such as Wells Fargo, First Place Bank, Fidelity, FHA loans, First Liberty, or Bank of America. So it's much more difficult to get loans.
That is not true.
Walter called, and that was the information that he was given.
But it's not true.
Okay, well,
Find out.
Yeah.
The well was drilled next to my property, and I think they hit the water line because my water's horrible.
oh, that's
I
terrible.
was wondering who do you get in touch with?
For water, it'd be ODNR. And I'll tell you a little bit of story.
Now it's horrible.
Yeah, I can give you the information for ODNR in a minute. Also, he reports that in the New York State title insurance, gas endorsements specifically void title insurance coverage if the premises are used for any commercial venture. Again, these are all considerations that you should think about if you are going to lease, and check into them carefully. Can people get a mortgage? Can you get title insurance? That sort of thing. ODNR is the Ohio Department of Natural Resources. They are the sole authority in Ohio that deals with regulation of oil and gas drilling. So not your local communities, cities, townships. Your county has nothing to do with it. And at the federal level, we've seen all the exemptions. So it's only ODNR. And I won't go into the full story with poor Mark Mangan down in Medina, but he had a well drilled near him, and his water went bad, and he had an impossible time trying to get ODNR to look into his claim properly. There were records that were falsified. They didn't test appropriately. His story just goes on and on and on. He was going to try and fight it in court, but he would have had to pay an additional $40,000 for experts, because you can't just go to court. If you want to submit evidence, it has to be by experts, and it would have been another $40,000. So he instead went to the IG here in Ohio and went to the FBI, and they are investigating this case because it was so difficult for him. He still has methane and other contaminants in his water. Ohio Department of Natural Resources, they're understaffed. They have 32 field inspectors, and yet there are 64,000 active wells and 275,000 total wells. There is no requirement in Ohio for any well to ever be inspected. That's current wells, wells that have been capped, or even during the drilling process. While ODNR says that they like to look at a well 7 times during the full drilling process, in fact, they're not required to ever look at that drilling, even during the well casing, which is the most critical time. And in fact, in the last year, they only were on site on average 66% of the time for the well casing. The rest of the time, they just take the energy company's word that everything was done correctly. They also have a conflict of interest because they are solely funded by the oil and gas permits and also by the oil and gas severance tax. And so they are funded by the people they're also supposed to regulate. And furthermore, they are in business with some of the very people that they have to regulate. So for instance, in Ross County, HOPCO is an energy company, and they own, they're in business. They've leased land, the state of Ohio has leased land to HOPCO. HOPCO is also drilling a well, and there were some significant problems with it, and ODNR has to go and determine whether or not there's a problem with that well. So this is going to become much more problematic as state-owned land is now open for business. As you may know, state parks are now open for drilling. That's the end of that section. I'm going to try and go pretty quickly through leasing, because I know that that was a section that people wanted to be covered. So first 2 rules. One is that never, ever, ever, no matter what, please enter into a lease without consulting an attorney, and not just Uncle Joe, the attorney, but an attorney who is experienced in oil and gas. That's really critical. And second, I'm not an attorney, so please think of this as information and not legal advice. And so with that, we can get started. On our website is NEOGAP, NEOGAP.org. Under the tab at the top, Learn More, and then Leases, you will see a number of leases. And what we have there are 3 leases that are comprehensive leases. These are not the leases that the landman would have given you, because those are very biased. These are more protective, not completely protective, but they're much better. ALOV stands for Associated Landowners of the Ohio Valley. They were one of the first landowner associations that came into being. And so they have negotiated for a higher price, maybe, as well as a better lease with Chesapeake, although their lease does have some setbacks. The Wyoming County, Pennsylvania lease is a very good lease as well, negotiated with Chesapeake back in 2009, and real emphasizes the community impacts, important. And the third is Harvard's environmental health and environment and health impacts is more like a guideline, and also that's really good reading as well. I'm just going to cover three little topics on leasing. There are many, many more. Water quality clause, the drilling unit size, and the compressor stations. So the ALOV, that's what I call it, ALOV lease, it has a number of really good terms in there. It has 1,500 feet that you can, that are required to be tested that around a well or a pit or something like that. Let me just find my notes here. Here we go. Testing prior to and at the completion of drilling. And the lease are going to have the testing if there's a change in the water and water quality degraded will be presumed to be the drilling companies. And they must provide a replacement. And so when you look at it, this looks like a very, very good and supportive lease. The problem is that it doesn't say what chemicals that it needs to test for. So the Chesapeake could test for one chemical and it would fulfill that lease. So that's a huge problem. And this lease has been signed by thousands of people. It was first signed by about 2,000 people back in March near the Columbiana area, and then again by another couple thousand people, and it's been brought around all over the state, and many landowner associations are using this lease. And so it's a big, big problem. It only requires testing within 1,500 feet, but we've seen that methane can go 3,200 feet and can migrate. You want to make sure that it's tested 3,200 feet in the whole radius of the well, because you want testing of your neighbor's property as well as yours. You don't want to just test yours, you want to make sure that you're being a good neighbor. It talks about a pollution or the reduction of water, yet methane is not considered a pollutant. So you need to be really careful when you're using the words in that language. I don't know that methane contamination would be covered in this lease. And it says that it's going to have a replacement supply for water. But what does that mean? Is that a water buffalo? And what are you going to do in the winter when it freezes in your garage or out in the back? And how are you going to, supply your farm animals with water and all that? That needs to be much more descriptive in the lease. And who's going to prove that that it was them that contaminated? We're not going to be able to rely on ODNR. So are they going to allow you to have an independent hydrologist and geologist come in and help you with that? That needs to be in the lease, that you can hire an independent experts to test, and they have to pay for it. So those are just some of the things that I just picked out of that lease. The Harvard guideline also has some concerns as well, along the same kinds of things. It doesn't have specific parameters to test for, and it doesn't assume that the driller will be responsible and so forth. So those are two leases with huge concerns regarding their water quality clause, and yet it's a good clause. The second item, the drilling unit size. The A-Love lease says that a pooled unit will not exceed 640 acres plus 10%. Yet the Wyoming County lease was only for 180 acres. And throughout the United States, 180 acres is more or less the norm for a drilling unit size. And current horizontal wells in Ohio are being drilled, all have 180 acres or less as their drilling unit. So why the 640 acre unit? Two little diagrams. One, if you own the square yellow piece of property, if you're in a 180 acre drilling unit and there's one well that goes onto that whole purple drilling unit, there's one well, your land will be held in production for as long as that well is in production. You will have a relatively higher percent of the royalties than if they put one well on the 640 acre unit. Additionally, if they just put one well on all 640 acres, just one well, they can hold your property indefinitely with only maybe that one well on it. So it's in your best interest to make sure that you have a smaller size drilling unit, not the 640 acre, but rather the 180 acres for the drilling size. The third area is compressor stations, and you saw in that video where the woman had the man had the compressor station right behind their house and how loud it was. I've seen meters that go up to like 80 decibels. It's extremely, extremely loud. In the A-Love lease, they say that only compressors stations for gas on the drilling unit will be considered. Well, if the drilling unit is 640 acres, it's likely that there's going to be a compressor station. And in that lease, they don't talk at all about how far away the compressor station needs to be from your house or from your barn or anything. It doesn't talk about having written consent for the placement of that compressor station, or a monetary compensation if it's on your property, or a maximum decibel level. These things can be quiet if they are housed correctly and so forth and so on. They can be made quiet, but the company is never going to do that unless it's written into your lease. And the A-Love lease has none of that language, and yet thousands of people in Ohio have signed this lease thinking it's a really good protective lease. Really, really unfortunate. So those were the three things that I just wanted to briefly tell you about. And there are additional lease components that we can talk about. But when you go back and think that we've had some of the best minds in the country looking at those big leases, the A-Love lease and the Harvard Guide and the Wyoming County lease, and they weren't able to get the language correct. And I was able to look at those leases and find problems with that. Realize how difficult it will be to get a really protective lease and write one. And if you are able to do that, it's unlikely that the energy company or the drilling company is ever going to sign it, because it's not in their interest, it's in yours. So think carefully. But if after all of that, you think it's a good idea to sign a lease, I want to make sure that you have some other things in there as well. One would be air quality standards and testing. Make sure that they're testing so that you saw with the infrared camera the volatile organic compounds that are coming out. Make sure that those are tested and that all of that is sealed. Turns out that there are regulations in urban areas that they don't have, that are not in rural areas in Ohio. That's the way the law reads. Well, that's really silly. You make sure that in the release, if you live in a rural area, that you get those urban regulations, because it's stricter and it's really important to put in there. And the third thing is make sure that you put in these community impacts, where the compressor stations will be, the placement of the pipelines, the truck traffic route and hours of operation. All that needs to be spelled out in a lease if you're going to protect yourself. So, will a lease protect you? We keep saying this again and again. A lease is only a piece of paper. And a piece of paper cannot protect your groundwater, your safety, your health, or your property values. It will only guide a scrupulous driller to do the right thing, or it will help you get compensated if something goes wrong. But if something goes wrong, you're going to need to go to court. And so you need to realize who you're up against if you need to go to court. You're up against a multinational corporation with the best attorneys in the world, all arguing against you. So the costs that you need to think about are attorney fees that you should be maybe setting aside from that signing bonus and the royalty payments that you get. Experts you need in order to investigate and then testify if you need to go to court. Property devaluation. If you have a well near your property, it's likely that you're going to have fewer buyers when they take a look at it. Some banks won't write a mortgage. That's a contested point. We'll talk about that at a later date. And taxes. If you get a large lump sum at the beginning, it'll bump you up into a higher tax category. You'll pay a lot on those on the initial bonus. So that initial pile of money that looked like it was going to be so good may not be quite what you think it is after you realize what all the considerations. This was just the other day in the newspaper, in the New York Times, people who are now regretting that they have ever signed a lease, and large groups of landowners who are in New York who are actively trying to get out of the leases that they signed. They're actually holding meetings. So we're at the informational stage where they're now at the stage where they're holding meetings to see how they can get out of the leases that they've actually signed. So, big problem. But here in Ohio, our experience can be different from that in Pennsylvania and other places. We can say no until the regulations and the safeguards can catch up with our technology. So we can say no to leases. Right now, that doesn't mean forever. That means just now. You can say come back next year, come back in 2 years, come back whenever it suits you. And you can say no to drilling at the state level by helping our legislators enact a moratorium. There's a moratorium in place in New York and in New Jersey and in Maryland. There's no reason we can't do something like that here in Ohio as well. Help educate others in your communities like we're doing tonight. Educational meetings, talk with your neighbors, connect with others, host a meeting or show Gasland or one of the other movies that are available so that people understand what's going on with shale. And again, it's neogap.org. So thank you, and I'm happy to take questions.